we are going back and forth at every level, driving both sides towards a ceasefire and driving both sides towards an end to this war.
Russia has the advantage, as you know. They have encircled about 2,500 soldiers.
This Judge Boasberg, is a Democrat activist.
The economy is strong overall and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, constructive conversation. President Trump holds what he calls a, quote, very good call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. For his part, President Zelenskyy wasn't as effusive, but it is clear the two men are still focusing on a partial agreement that President Trump reached with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday about some dimension of a partial ceasefire. We're tracking what happens next in those quite complicated talks. Court clash. Federal judge extends the deadline for the Trump Justice Department to hand over details, and the judge wants a number of details on the Trump administration's deportation flights. This extension comes as Attorney General Pam Bondi says the Trump administration will absolutely, that's her word, absolutely continue to remove Venezuelan immigrants. President Trump, meanwhile, ramped up criticism of the judge, who right now is blocking some of those moves. No, the shot's not there. We'll try to get that back on our program in short order. I want to start tonight at Nancy Cordes at the White House and Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon. So, Nancy, we had second conversation. Putin yesterday, right. Zelenskyy today.
Yep.
What, if anything, is the White House saying about where it finds itself in this push for a ceasefire?
They're saying quite a lot. Actually, the White House press secretary even read the entire statement aloud in the briefing, and when you hear what she had to say, it indicates why they wanted to make it public and make sure that everyone heard it. It appears that they are sending a message to Vladimir Putin. The president says, according to the statement, that they had a great meeting. He also went out and posted that online with Zelenskyy, that they're moving in the right direction. And he says, interestingly, that they had a very good talk about military intelligence sharing, which is going to continue between the U.S. and Ukraine. And also, he said that Ukraine is looking for more Patriot missile systems and that President Trump has agreed to work with him to find what was available. Why is all that important? Because it shows that the White House, at least right now, is not planning to give in to some of Russia's demands, which were notably that there be some kind of halt on military intelligence sharing between the U.S. and other countries and Ukraine, and also that military aid to Ukraine from foreign countries would cease as well before Russia would agree to a 30-day ceasefire. So this is a signal, and a not too subtle one, Major, that they are not willing to give on those 2 points, at least for now.
Charlie, help us understand why that's important, as Nancy just outlined it. Continuing provide intelligence and military support, whether it comes from the United States or support of European countries.
Well, Major, first of all, we have to point out that President Putin pretty much dismissed this whole idea of a ceasefire, a limited ceasefire that they wouldn't fire at each other's energy grids. Having said that, President Zelenskyy said something like 140 drones were sent over from Russia, specifically targeting the energy grid in eastern Ukraine. That was monitored here as well. That was within hours of that phone call. There's some discrepancy as to whether the order went out and wasn't stopped or whether those birds were already in the air when that happened. But where that becomes critical is that is where the Ukrainians need that intelligence, need to have the Patriot weapons defense systems, and they need to have those weapons. So there are sort of levers that this Trump administration are able to pull, and which will enable the Ukrainians to continue fighting. Because if there's a ceasefire, if there's a temporary ceasefire, it benefits the Russians because it gives them an opportunity to regroup, to refresh, to reposition their troops, and they're on a full court press right now, especially in that Kursk region, pushing Ukrainian forces out and along the front lines. And I should mention both sides, and we got the intelligence here, both sides are fighting now, and you'll see this before a ceasefire. It happens every battle I've ever seen, that there'll be a hurry-up offense before the fighting stops.
And Charlie, we are, of course, focused on the conversations between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine. But for the sixth day, if I have my numbers correct, the United States has been engaging in what the Pentagon frequently refers to as kinetic military activity with the Houthis in Yemen. What's going on?
Yeah, well, you were accurate. So this new phase of the fight, I suppose, to describe it, began on Saturday when the United States launched one of the largest attacks on Yemen soil against the Houthis. And they were trying to take out radar control areas, command and control centers. They specifically are going after these UAV launchers. They said they took out some leadership. So that happened on Saturday. We checked again. It happened on Sunday as well, happened on Monday. I just checked today because we got news out of Yemen or from our friends in the Middle East that explosions were happening once again. I then confirmed it here with the Navy that they had engaged again. So this has been described by Defense Secretary Hegseth as an unrelenting campaign. So this is going to continue because I asked whether these are going to be waves of airstrikes. They said it's not going to be stop and go. It's not going to be picking off targets as has been done under the Biden administration. Their words, not mine. But this is going to be an unrelenting campaign. So you have the USS Harry S. Truman there. They've also been intercepting Houthi drones and missiles aimed at the carrier strike group, destroyers in the region. Nothing has come close, we understand. So, yes, as you say, this is a kinetic battle, and it is ongoing.
Charlie Daggett at the Pentagon. Nancy Cordes, North Line of the White House. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Attorney General Pam Bondi released a statement criticizing a federal district judge involved in the ongoing legal battle over the Trump administration's deportation flights involving Venezuelan non-citizens. Bondi said in part, quote, "This is another outrageous judicial power grab by an activist judge allowing unelected judges to usurp executive power as a fundamental threat to our democracy and the rule of law." That from the Attorney General. I'll bring in Scott McFarland. Scott, catch us up on where we are with this. There's politics and optics, which the administration believes are very much on its side. And then there are fundamental legal questions of what any administration can do to designate anyone in this country something that allows them to be swiftly deported and sent to another country.
This thing has been simmering, bubbling up. It feels like it's about to boil over now. This one singular dispute between the Trump administration and this chief judge here in Washington, James Boasberg, almost as if it's a proxy battle for something much larger. Will the administration honor court orders they disagree with? Because at this point, Boasberg suspects not only was he defied over the weekend during those deportations when he ordered the planes turned around and they didn't turn around. Based on the court filings we looked through today, it seems like Boasberg's suspicious he was defied again today. He had ordered by 12 p.m. Eastern time for the Trump administration and the Department of Justice to answer a series of granular questions about timing. When did the planes take off? When did they leave U.S. airspace? Basically, when did they do what they did vis-a-vis his orders? The Trump administration again today declined to answer those questions, saying they are sensitive, secret information, and they accused Boasberg of turning the case upside down and micromanaging the whole deportation effort. And he's given them another day to file answers to his questions by 12 p.m. tomorrow. If that doesn't happen, you have what one former federal judge says is not a possible constitutional crisis, but an ongoing constitutional crisis. You can't just defy or disobey orders you don't like.
Let me ask you a couple of basic questions. Has the Trump administration in its legal filings asserted that everyone on these deportation flights was a known or proven member of this Venezuelan gang, Trinidad, which has been classified a terrorist organization?
Foreign terrorist organization. The judge is pressing them for more information about that. There are 3 flights that were linked to this deportation effort, wants to know the basics of each of those 3 flights, timing and otherwise. But some of that's immaterial. I mean, you get, it's not immaterial to the national security of America. Right. It's not immaterial to the Trump administration or to those who want tighter borders. But it's immaterial to the more fundamental dispute here is the administration didn't like the court order. They have accused the judge of being a radical, of being a liberal, of being outside his bounds, and that he should be impeached. The judge is trying to do here, based on his orders, is just get them to answer questions and follow orders. And when the Chief Justice of the United States weighs in, which he did, saying you don't impeach judges you disagree with, you appeal. You can tell there's a bigger issue here than just this deportation.
And it is worth pointing out that the basis legally that the administration was asserting was the Enemy Aliens Act, invoked 3 times before in our history, but only when there has been an act of war. The administration arguing their invasion of our country is alike an act of war and that they're terrorists or gang members. The judge is asking for some evidence to back up that assertion, correct?
And some arguments and some clarity. It's not a novel law. It's been used before, but it's novel in our lifetimes, and it's novel in the judge's lifetimes, and I think he wants more arguments before he agrees to let things happen on such an expedited basis. But again, the bigger issue that seems to be pressing on people, legal scholars, former judges, potentially the current judges, is all that aside, there was an order, it appears to have been disobeyed, and now there is a public discourse criticizing judges, and that measure fundamentally could put judges in danger if you have people taking matters into their own hands. We've seen that before with judges who crossed Trump.
Hence the statement from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts. Scott MacFarlane, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Many former officials say President Trump's cuts to USAID could hurt America on the world stage and indirectly assist the interests of China and Russia. Among the voices saying exactly that, former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel. He joins me next right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. A federal judge has ruled that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency likely overstepped and maybe did more than that in its efforts to dismantle the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. The judge is now requiring the Trump administration to allow current USAID employees and service contractors to once again have access to email and payment systems, though, to be candid, that's a small tactical legal victory. USAID, as we've known it for decades, pretty much doesn't exist. I want to bring in former Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel to discuss this. Chuck, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining me. You're worried about this from a national security perspective, not only a foreign aid perspective. Why?
Thanks, Major, for giving me a chance to talk about this. I'm very concerned about this. You know, the USAID was established in 1961 by John Kennedy, U.S. Foreign Assistance Act. Every president since then, except President Trump, every Congress since then, strongly supported this. And they've supported it because USAID, what it does, help develop countries, make friends, influence people, give us an opportunity to project power around the world, assist others, be the kind of nation America is, respected, admired, all of that. That's what USAID does. Now, that doesn't mean that there are some things that, like any federal government program, could be tightened up, be better, but do it the smart way. Do it in a way that you're aware of the importance of USAID. To just cut it off it is a very dangerous, dumb thing, because fundamentally what it does, it cuts the trust and confidence that these countries all over the world have in America. And these are countries all over the world, and we need friends. It's a global strategy that this plays a very big part in.
Talk to me about the China-Russia angle, in that if we're not on this world stage, not doing what we've done for decades, they'll do something else.
Well, that's true, because I've talked to many ambassadors about this and other dynamics of what's going on. They will find alternatives. They'll have to find alternatives. They'll be forced to find alternatives. The Chinese are everywhere, as we know, in the world. The Chinese are saying, you can't trust the Americans. We're here. We can help you. We can help develop you. We can help with your health care and your education. And so you've got an option here. And some of these countries will be in a situation where they'll have to take that. And we're missing that whole point. You know, always the questions, the big questions in life, but especially foreign policy and government, where does this go? What happens next? Tell me how it ends. All that series of questions we're not asking. And if we were asking that, then we wouldn't do things like this.
Chuck, I want to ask you about things that are happening adjacent to this conversation about USAID. The Trump administration is trying to shut down Voice of America, as it has come to be known for decades. It also has used Doge and Elon Musk's associates to go to a nonprofit, the U.S. Institute of Peace, which is not part of the executive branch, to assert its authority there. You just asked this question, what's happening and where is it going? Can you answer that in those other two instances?
Well, I wish I had a good answer for you, Major, but I don't like where this is going. I don't like it for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's not in the interest of our country, and we're not thinking that way. Second, it's going to cause some real disconcerting action in this country. You know, most presidents, every president since World War II, and I've worked for three of them. I've known them all since Nixon, worked with them, about three of them. They've tried to bring people together, the country together. They've tried to bring their allies together. And what I see happening here, to answer your question, is President Trump is doing just the opposite. He's not working with Congress. I don't know what he's going to do with the courts here. That's an open question. But he's not trying to bring a country together. I mean, this is a great country. This nonsense about make America great again, this is a great country. We can be better. We need to be better. We self-correct like no other nation in the history of man. But this is very dangerous, I think, in my opinion, Major, where we're headed.
And Chuck, the broader question is, and the Trump administration is very clear about this, it doesn't believe the post-World War II transatlantic structure and international relationships matter nearly as much as you do, and lots of people who are worried about these actions do. They say the American people knew that Trump didn't like them, wanted him to take a sledgehammer to them, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Well, I can't speak for anybody who voted for Trump, what they thought or what they didn't think. But I'll tell you this, the post-World War II world order that America built with its allies has been very successful. Oh, we've got problems. We still have problems. We have wars, but there's been no World War III. There's been no nuclear exchange. More people free than ever before. America is more prosperous than it's ever been. More countries have hope, possibilities, prosperity than ever before in the history of man. So to tear that foundation down, and that's exactly what we're seeing here, and say that doesn't matter. America is strong unto itself. Just a cursory reading of the 1930s would bring some reality to this. And I think we better be careful here because the world is far more dangerous today than it was in the 1930s. And it was pretty damn dangerous then. You know, I wasn't around in the 1930s, but I was born the year after World War II ended, when my dad came back from the South Pacific. And like a lot of the baby boomers, I was fortunately grounded in some of that history. But we better be careful because we're putting ourselves in the world in a very precarious position as we look down the road to the future. We need friends, we need allies. And one other thing, as former Secretary of Defense, one of the main reasons we have been able to project power around the world, Major, is because of our friends, because of our alliances, because of relationships where we can station our troops and our ships everywhere in the world. Without that, we wouldn't have the same ability to defend ourselves.
Former Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel. I appreciate it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Major.
Federal Reserve makes its first interest rate decision since President Trump's tariffs began to take effect, and conversation about possibly more. Money Watch's Kelly O'Grady has been tracking all this and will join me next right here on America Decides. Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. The Federal Reserve left interest rates unchanged today, but it noted there is some growing uncertainty about the direction, short and medium term, of the U.S. economy. Today's decision, as you might remember, marked the second consecutive time the central bank opted to hold rates steady. This following a series of cuts between September and December. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins me now. I'm always happy to see you, Kelly. Break it down for us. What's the most important takeaway of what actually transpired today?
Uncertainty, Major.
Yeah.
We heard Chair Powell say uncertainty over and over again, and it was driven by a number of things. The effect of the tariffs, potential tariffs that we have yet to see come into place on April 2nd, the consumer sentiment and how that has been weighing on a potential pullback in spending. I think that Powell tried to paint a picture that, look, the hard data does not say that we are in a recession or anything close to it. And he's absolutely right. In fact, we have seen inflation tick down when we got the CPI reading just last week. But there was just this air of uncertainty of what these trade policies and what this consumer sentiment could mean for the economy. And remember, if you have high inflation, but also a pullback in spending, that is a really tough situation for the Fed to be in.
Kelly O'Grady, thank you very, very much. I want to bring in Donna Ginther now. She is a distinguished professor of economics at the venerable University of Kansas, of course, nearby University of Missouri, just as venerable, if not more so. Donna, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Let's begin our conversation about the Federal Reserve action today and what it might suggest about where things are heading economically.
Great. Well, the Fed stood still on interest rates, and they did that in response to the amount of uncertainty in the economy. And what was notable about their announcement was that they're expecting, the FOMC members are expecting higher inflation, higher unemployment, and lower growth going forward. So, and that is being attributed to the uncertainty in the economy about the future of economic policy.
And yet the stock market rose today. The Dow was up nearly 1%, the NASDAQ up 1.7%, the S&P up 1%. Either they were pricing that in or not as nervous about higher inflation, slower economic growth, and more uncertainty.
I think they were pricing it in. You remember last week was pretty bad for the stock market. We entered correction territory, and it's bounced back a bit, but not to the level it was a month ago.
And Donna, regionally, meaning in the Midwest, what kind of effects, if any, are you seeing about either the reductions to the size of the federal workforce or the conversation about either where tariffs are or where they might be heading, and the overall umbrella term that Kelly O'Grady invoked and the Federal Reserve Chairman, more importantly, invoked all day today, uncertainty?
Well, what we're seeing in the Midwest is uncertainty about the future of federal employment. Kansas City is home to 30,000 federal workers, and we know that hundreds of workers have lost their jobs. If that number moves into the thousands, then there's going to be a large amount of unemployment and a reduction in consumer spending, especially for discretionary spending for things such as cars, restaurants, home building materials, and the like.
And what about the agriculture sector of the Midwest and the conversation about either tariffs or movement at USAID, which in some small measure has attachments to U.S. agriculture?
A year ago, in fiscal year 24, the federal government spent $100 million on grain sorghum for USAID. And that's gone away coming this year. And so there are stocks of sorghum in grain bins in the state of Kansas. So there's a lot of uncertainty going forward, especially with tariffs. China buys a lot of sorghum from the state of Kansas. That's a big concern for farmers. And the farm economy was already in the doldrums before any of the talk of tariffs. So it's not a good indicator for the future of ag in this state. We'll be watching what happens with tariffs very carefully.
Donna Ginther, University of Kansas, thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll bring in our political panel, Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie. Megan served as the Director of Message Planning for the Biden administration. Maura previously advised both former Speaker John Boehner and former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republicans both. So, Control Room, I believe we have a compilation of some sound taken from a recent focus group of swing voters in Michigan who supported President Trump in the most recent election, but might be having some misgivings. Please play that.
By putting these tariffs in and terrorizing the world, now things are just going to get more expensive.
I feel like a lot of his actions have just been disruptive and creating chaos.
I was voting for him based off of the economy the first time around, and I'm seeing a significant decline.
Megan, since you're at the table, you get the first question. One focus group does not a political dynamic make, but it is interesting, and this focus group has sort of been making the rounds in Washington this week. How much, as someone who is a Democrat interested in any possible fissures within the Trump coalition, how much stock do you put in this?
I put a lot of stock in this. These are swing voters that were Biden voters that then turned to Trump. These are voters that will go back to Democrats in the midterms and in 28. I think that if the economy does not start to improve and we continue to see the chaos, these voters will go back to Republicans in the midterms. Again, that won't
go back to Democrats.
Sorry, Democrats. Thank you. That won't impact Donald Trump and his political capital, but it will impact Congress and it will affect 28.
Maura, your take on it?
You know, I think that we're seeing this play out. I agree with Megan that if Democrats can get leadership and actually have a plan to move forward, yes, those voters will look for somebody to support. But right now, I think there are a lot of voters who feel politically homeless. They are very frustrated by the chaos that Donald Trump is causing the Republican Party. And you're right, he does not have political capital to be worried about because he's a lame duck president. But on the same side, you then have people like Chuck Schumer, who are an inconsistent leadership. You've got rifts happening there between he and Nancy Pelosi, and just a silence on the House side. So there's going to need to be some sort of shakeup here before the midterms, or you may see a lot of people sitting out this election.
Megan, I want to ask you about Michigan, because if what you're believing is true, it could be significant. There was a 234,000 vote shift from 2020 to 2024 in Trump's direction in Michigan. That's a lot. Few focus group, I'm reassessing, may be important, but it seems like a lot more has to happen for Michigan and the mentality that went for a 7-state swing state sweep for Trump to change.
Yes, but that was only at the presidential level. They still elected a Democrat to the Senate.
Slotkin, we heard.
So that they are not just solely Republican voters. They voted for Donald Trump for the economy, as these focus groups are saying. So if there is not change there, they will not vote for a Republican moving forward. But to Maura's point on people being homeless, I agree with her. And I also think if the Democrats do not get their act together and get some different leadership going here, these Democrats in Congress are going to get primary too. So we could see a lot of changes moving into the midterms.
So since you brought it up, Megan, let's dig into that big if.
Mm-hmm.
There is this conversation about what is the future of Chuck Schumer? What is the future of the generational Democratic leadership, at least in Congress? What do you think?
I think that Schumer needs to do what Nancy Pelosi did and look for a way to step aside for a new generation of people.
Right away or at the end of this 2-year cycle?
I'm not sure what the best thing is for the Congress. I'm not an expert in the Senate, so I leave that to them to decide. But it is very clear that the Democrats in this country and the Senate and the House want new leadership. They want younger leadership. And so I do think it would be smart for him to start to think of an exit plan and to have some new leadership.
Maura, I would like your perspective on this because you work for someone who I know very, very well, covered him for years, John Boehner. He dealt as Speaker with an insurgency within his own party, younger, aggressive, more ideologically motivated members, and ultimately had to, not because he necessarily wanted to, he managed it as best he could, but ultimately had to bow to their rising influence. Is that something you're seeing playing out on the left?
Well, I'll say that John Boehner wanted to leave before that happened. So there was that kind of, he had already looked for a strategy out, but he was also looking to pass the torch. He wanted to pass the torch before then. And if you'll remember, Eric Cantor lost his primary to David Bratt
Yes.
and wasn't able to do so. So, but I will say that would be a great strategy for Chuck Schumer. He's not up for re-election until 28. So he has time, but if he wanted to bring somebody else into leadership, almost act like a mentor in a way and help them through this process. But I do think that it's well past time for the Democrats to look for a leadership that can bring in new voters and galvanize a base that they had long purported to have, but largely left because of this, moral superiority they purported, they kind of put forth during this last election that rubbed voters the wrong way. And they need to find a way to have a message that's not just anti-Trump, but has a path forward and looking to something that they can provide. What's the why, and then what's the how to get things done?
And Megan, right now, this recess week, when Congress is not in Washington, the biggest thing happening in Democratic circles is Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are going around Nevada, Colorado. They're pulling in 20,000, in some venues 30, 50,000 people just to talk about politics and the fight against the oligarchy. AOC is a potential primary challenger to Chuck Schumer. How much does all this feed together?
I think it feeds together a lot. I think that they're out there galvanizing the base, which is super important. I think they are both more left than the middle of the country and the middle of the Democratic Party probably is, and where we're going to win. But I do think it is important to get people out there. It shows that they're fighting. It's sound bites. It's on the news. But I just don't think that the rest of the country is where the far left is, like Bernie Sanders or AOC. So I do think we need to come to terms and we need to have some real leadership. And I just don't think that Schumer is providing that for us right now.
Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie. Megan gets the first and the last word. Maura, I promise I will make it up to you on your next visit here, whether it's via Zoom or here at the desk. President Trump says his Chinese counterpart, that Xi Jinping, will visit Washington in the, quote, not too distant future. But the White House has been pretty vague about what all that means. Whenever that happens, there will be trade tensions to discuss and hash out. More on that next. You're watching America Decides.
We had the head of China coming in to top people right underneath President Xi, and he'll be coming in the not too distant future.
Welcome back. That was President Trump kind of teasing a possible visit to Washington by China's leader Xi Jinping. That visit, whenever it comes, would have at the center of the conversation trade tensions, that's for sure. Jennifer Welch and Ravi Agrawal join me now. Jennifer is the chief economics analyst at Bloomberg. I will be able to spit it out, I promise. And Ravi, of course, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and a friend of our show. Jennifer, let me start with you. How much is the trade conversation right now between the Trump administration and China changing things? Is China adapting in new ways to what's been going on here for the last 5 or 6 weeks?
Well, first of all, apologies. My title's a little bit of a mouthful. You can just call me Jenny.
I think I might fall back on that, Jenny.
In terms of the negotiations, right now it seems that Beijing's at a little bit of a loss, that negotiations are stuck at lower levels. And I think despite President Trump's hint that maybe there'll be a leader-level discussion at some point, first of all, we've seen this before, including in this trade war, hasn't come to fruition. If I was President Xi Jinping, I would not be coming to the United States anytime soon until I knew what I was going to get out of it. And I think right now the talks are nowhere near that point.
And it's been my experience covering the American presidency for many years that conversations with Vladimir Putin can be organized pretty quickly, and other world leaders. The Chinese do not operate that way. They want a preliminary process in which they have gone through all sorts of steps and stages to, as you suggested, get a better understanding of where this is going, and most importantly for them, where it's likely to land.
Absolutely. President Xi Jinping doesn't like to be surprised, and no one working for him wants to be landed in the position of having put him in that difficult spot.
Ravi, I want to ask you about your take on where things have transpired the last week. 2 conversations now between the president with Putin and Zelenskyy and Ukraine, and what prospects, if any, we see in resolving this conflict in a way that allows Ukraine to retain sovereignty and doesn't give everything that Russia wants to Moscow.
I like the way you put the question, because it really is in sharp contrast to the China situation, because someone like Xi Jinping would have been looking at the White House visit that Zelenskyy had, for example, and seeing how chaotic, unplanned, how rude the Americans were. And obviously, he is not going to want anything like that. He's going to want deliverables that are worked out well ahead of time. And you make a good point there about Putin as well. Easier to organize because he's another leader who cares more about the theatrics and working over Trump. But what we've learned from the set of calls that have taken place so far between Trump and Putin and then between Trump and Zelenskyy is, a fair bit of sort of agreement that the two sides, Ukraine and Russia, need to move towards a ceasefire at some point, but very short on actual substantive points as to how to do that, when it actually begins, who enforces it, and then most of all, who backstops it in the future. So were they to actually activate a broader ceasefire, is there any sense that this leads to a place where there are security guarantees for Ukraine? None of that at this point is clear from any of the readouts we've had.
Jenny, and I thank you for giving me that opportunity just to say, Jenny, Defense Department put out a new national defense strategic guidance that says China is America's #1 strategic foe, and everything about planning, preparation should be directed toward China. How significant or not is that?
I think that's consistent with what we saw under the previous administration, or the Biden administration, that referred to China as a near-peer competitor. But I think the question is, how is that going to funnel down to actions, and how does it square with some of the department's other priorities, like reducing staffing, reducing waste and fraud? I mean, just the other day, they cut the Office of Net Assessment, which was a critical player in the Cold War and had been a critical player in a lot of the China competition that's been happening to date. The other thing I'd flag is the military competition doesn't just happen in the military realm. It depends on other things. Earlier in the program, you were talking about cuts to USAID. You want to increase U.S. posture in the Indo-Pacific, you need USAID.
You need that because China also, as Chuck Hagel said, operates on many different platforms in many different ways, persuasively and otherwise, diplomatically, economically, culturally, to try to get its way around the world.
And with information, to your point earlier about Voice of America as well, key source of building U.S. soft power that is an enabling force for everything DoD is seeking to accomplish.
And Robbie, I'm going to give you 1 minute on this, and I wish I could give you more. How much is this conversation where Trump wants to reattach Russia to the United States bothersome or important at all to China?
I think a bit of both. I mean, look, China likes the fact that it is able to divide the United States' allies around the world. The more that can happen, the better it is. It has valued its partnership with Russia. I imagine it is looking at a closer U.S. Russia sort of rapprochement of sorts, or whatever it is that we're looking at right now, with some puzzlement, because what does it actually mean? A lot depends on what actually happens with the future of Ukraine. But then more than all of that, I think, is what happens to the future of the rules that we all have been talking about here and for basically the past 80 years. If Putin is able to get away with invading Ukraine, then the message for China is that they could get away with potentially invading Taiwan. So that is one key aspect, key lens through which they're going to be looking at any resolution of what happens in that war.
Robbie Agrawal, always a pleasure. Jennifer, Jenny Welsh, thank you. I'm telling you, I'll get it all right, I swear to God. Can Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer bring things back together within the Democratic coalition? Well, Nancy Pelosi has a sharp critique of where things are currently. We'll speak with a very significant Democratic Party insider about Schumer's potential path forward. And for the Democrats, that's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she still supports Chuck Schumer as Senate Minority Leader. That's the good news for Schumer. This after he voted for a Republican bill to avert a government shutdown and got a lot of blowback from Democrats. But here's the bad news for Schumer, at least as far as what Pelosi had to say about those tactics. Let's listen.
I myself don't give away anything for nothing. And I think that's what happened the other day. We could have, in my view, perhaps gotten them to agree to a third way. They may not have agreed to it, but at least the public would have seen they're not agreeing to it. And that, then they would have been shutting government down.
Jimmy Harrison joins me now via Zoom from Columbia, South Carolina. As many of you probably remember, he formerly served as the chairman of the Democratic National Committee. Jamie, it's always good to see you. What Pelosi said was, I myself don't give away anything for nothing. Is that what Senator Schumer and the Democrats who voted with the Republican bill in fact did?
Well, listen, Major, before I was DNC chair, I was the floor director for the House Democrats, and I ran the whip operation for House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn. So I cut my teeth on floor politics, learning at the knee of Nancy Pelosi and Jim Clyburn. And that is, she was speaking the truth there as it relates to what you do when you're negotiating legislation. If Republicans who control the House, the Senate, and the White House, if they need Democratic votes in order to pass legislation, then there has to be Democratic seats at the table to negotiate what those bills look like. And there were no Democrats at the table in the House or the Senate. And so if you don't need, if we're not going to get a seat, you don't need our votes, then pass the legislation, move it forward. But Democrats have to stand up for their constituents and the priorities that they were sent to Washington, D.C. to defend. That's to make sure Social Security, Medicare, and all of these government programs that are necessary for the flourishing of the American people.
You talked about understanding the situation on the floor of the House of Representatives. It appears that Senate Democrats, led by Charles Schumer, assumed incorrectly that House Republicans would not pass the budget bill, the continuing resolution to avert the government shutdown. And when they did, they effectively were strategically flat-footed.
Well, Major, the thing that I say here is, again, ultimately, Republicans control the Senate and the House. And so if they know they want it to be in the majority, they wanted to control the government, well, there are responsibilities for doing so. And if you don't have all the votes yourself in order to get the legislation done, then that means you got to build a coalition in order to do that. And, you know, for Democrats, we got to let Republicans, if they can't do it, let them own all of this mess that they have created. For the last few months, since Donald Trump became president, there's been an unconstitutional attack on the federal government in this country. And that means that the American people have been suffering. We're hearing that the Department of Education that they're trying to gut. We know USAID they have gutted. We see the attacks on veterans right now. They're turning their backs on veterans who have done so much for the American people. And so we got to let the Republicans, we should not own have any responsibility of this chaos that has been created by Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and congressional Republicans.
Jamie, Bernie Sanders said that it was an absolute failure of Democratic leadership in the Senate. Senator Adam Schiff, California, said a bad day for the country. Can Chuck Schumer survive this? Should he?
Well, you know, Leader Schumer and the Senate Democrats are going to have to make that determination. But, you know, I disagreed with the strategy here. I just don't think that is where we needed to go right now. The American people want to see that Democrats can stand up and fight for them. They see what is going on. Veterans are looking for people to fight for them. You know, our kids with disabilities and special needs, those families are looking at what's happening at the Department of Education, and they want somebody to fight for them. Democrats have historically did that. We have to continue to do that. And this was one of those opportunities to stand up and fight for the American people, the people who desperately need us right now, as Donald Trump and Elon Musk and congressional Republicans are attacking the things that they have relied upon for decades, for generations.
Jamie, you're no longer the DNC chairman, so you might have a fresher perspective on this. Is what you just described, the lack of perceived fight, a generational problem for the party?
I don't know if it's a generational problem, but it's definitely a mindset problem. And it's the big problem that we have right now within the Democratic Party. And this is something for 4 years as DNC chair in my internal discussions. I often remark to some folks that we need to fight more. That's part of the reason why we saw that we lost young men's votes in this last elections, because they saw the Democratic Party as weak, as not fighting for them, standing up. And they were attracted to Donald Trump because even if they did not agree with him, they saw that he was willing to fight for the things that he believed in. What the American people need right now from the Democratic Party is for us to fight just as hard, if not harder, for the things we believe in as those things that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are trying to destroy in this country. We have to stand up. We have to fight. We have to draw a line in the sand to say to them, you will not cross. We will fight for the American people and defend those things that they have poured their hearts and their souls and their money into, and that they deserve in order to flourish in our American system, in our economy.
Former DNC Chair Jamie Harrison, always a pleasure, sir. Thanks. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.